So the topic is actually living life to our fullest potential, which is probably the title of any class we do. In essence, that we want to really, especially in these times when there's just a lot of upheaval. Earlier this year, my wife Parvati suggested for me to read a book which she had read, and it's got an interesting title. The title is The Storm Before the Calm, which of course, what does the saying go? Calm before the storm. But it was saying that because we're in such tumultuous times with so much turmoil and change, that we have to be patient in this time. And because everything goes in cycles, not only the larger cycles of the ages that spiritually we talk about, the yugas, but even within that, there are times when, if we pay attention, we can see there are shorter term cycles as well. And the book talks about that. It talks about that when different cycles converge, and it was referring to the early 1930s being a time that was very much that way, where you had just a tremendous amount of upheaval with the Great Depression, changes in how government operated, the New Deal happened, Social Security became into play at that time, and a lot of other things, natural catastrophes. And obviously, if you look at what's going on today, you'll find that there are parallels to that, and it's normal to have these cycles. And then you even look at the story of the great epic of India, the Mahabharata. And we think we're living in unique times, but it's been going on in cycles forever. And that's comforting in a way if you can pull back from the immediacy of what's going on and see that that's the nature of Maya, of duality. The challenges are going to be always with us. And it's really for us to make the conscious and hopefully the superconscious choice to see them as opportunities. To really use them as springboards, the challenges that happens in our lives, to really not only do okay, but actually grow a whole lot. And because if we don't, we can get swept aside easily. I've really enjoyed, not recently, but boogie boarding in my life, and I was talking with Francisco, who lived in several of the islands in Hawaii, about being in Hawaii, but I didn't mention that I really like boogie boarding. But one thing you learn quickly about being around the ocean, you never turn away from the ocean, because you never know what can happen. I remember the last time we were in Hawaii on the island of Maui, we went to one of our favorite spots to snorkel. And usually it's pretty calm and perfect for snorkeling. And it wasn't that day. There was no way you could snorkel because the waves were coming in and pounding down. And so I thought, well, I'll just go out in the ocean without my snorkel gear and just play in the ocean. And so this wave came up, and I thought, just jump it as you can do. And it just came up another 5 feet, and it just pounded me into the ocean floor. And I knew I was going to be very colorful the next morning. And it was just this huge, beautiful rainbow of bruise that was there. But I could barely walk for a day. But luckily, because I do yoga postures every day, I thought, if nothing else, I can do a limited version of things to open up the possibility of my body healing. But I learned in boogie boarding that same principle. You always are tuning into the ocean. In a sense, in this allegory, the ocean is like the possibility of God coming to us. And if we're always aware, if we're always opening to that, then we can ride the wave. If we're not, we'll get crunched by that wave. And that happens frequently when you're spending a lot of time in the water, especially surfing or bodyboarding or boogie boarding. But I learned quickly that you're also sensitive to that experience. Because you're looking and to see what's going to happen. And you can see this tiny little movement out there, and it's going to be a wave that you're going to ride. But it's that big in terms of your perspective of it when it's way out there. And so you start to turn somewhat towards the beach, and you start moving. I mean, some of the boogie boarders have one fin, and they're short fins, and so they really can paddle and get their momentum going. But most of us don't hang around with one, foot thing to help us in that way. We're just moving the energy. And so, but when it starts coming, you start to just move more with it. You're looking behind and you're moving. And the more momentum you've got going, the better you're going to be able to ride that wave. Because you're aligning yourself with the power that's there. It's not like you're creating that experience. You're just allowing the experience to happen in a more productive way, more effective way. And that's the fun of riding waves, is that you become one with the wave. You sense that experience as you're doing that in that way. And there are times it still crushes you, even if you've ridden a good wave. But the other thing I got to learn quickly was waves come in sets. They call them sets, usually 3 at least come. And so if you're riding a wave and then it ends, I learned to run quickly back into the ocean so I could catch the second wave of the set, and then the same for the third. Because what happens if you don't do that, either you need to get out or you need to do what I'm doing, getting back in. Because the wave is going to come as a powerful wave. And again, are we going to be productive in aligning ourselves to that experience? And if we do, then we start to enjoy that challenge rather than feeling it, another wave, I'm getting pounded. But there are times when I remember down in Santa Barbara in California that boogie boarding there, and a lot of good waves, but every once in a while one would just come with a greater potency, let's put it that way. And it would just make you feel like you're in a washing machine. And you've got sand in all your openings. But if you think about it, that happens in life, doesn't it? Sometimes it just comes at you, and you just feel you can barely gasp for air with all the challenges that are happening. And you feel the equivalent of sand in your ears, your nose, your eyes, and everywhere else, that it's just the friction points in life really just come at you, and you feel, this isn't fair. I'm sure none of you have said that. But you get the sense, wait a minute, this isn't fair. I'm doing the best I can. Why am I getting just pounded by this? And it's because we're given the opportunity, the gift, of how do we refine what we're doing. Spirituality is about getting connected with tools, techniques, attitudes, approaches. How do we deal with our awareness, our mindset? How do we deal with the heart? How do we deal with devotion? How do we deal with shifting from emotion into openness of devotion? So all these things, the grit of life. You know how a pearl is produced, right, in a clam, in an oyster? It's because of friction. The sand that's rubbing, and it produces a pearl. And so we have the potential of being a pearl. But the grit, the friction, doesn't have to be something that is always forcing us, but we start to shift it from being that imposition into, this is great, I get to ride the wave. And so we start to look forward to that experience. But we can't be passive in that. And this is an interesting emphasis in the teaching of yoga and any true spirituality, is that we talk about peace, don't we? We emphasize peace. It's a very important part of who we are, but it's never passive. And I remember reading years ago, in the early years of when I got involved with yoga and meditation, reading this wonderful understanding of this, where they were doing studies on people, and they hooked them up so they could test their vital signs, their heart rate, their respiratory rate, their galvanic skin temperature resistance on the skin, and those kind of things. And they had them go into what we refer to in yoga as deep relaxation in the corpse pose, savasana. At the end of yoga postures, that's common for us to do. And what they found was this very interesting thing that relates to what I'm pointing out here, is that if people start to drift into a more dreamlike subconscious state, they came out of relaxation. Even though we're relaxed, it was passive. But those that continue to have a focus, whether it's a visualization focus, much like the one we just did, or just tuned into the breath, whatever it might be, but kept it more connected, that dynamic connection was still relaxed, and it was more relaxed. It was a deeper relaxation. And again, that's a good allegory or good illustration of we can approach life always from that perspective. Whatever happens, if we keep to that kind of reference point, and then not only just keep to it, but start moving and expanding and refining the experience, then that's really the path of yoga. And it's really the path of Kriya Yoga that Paramahansa Yogananda came to give us, was that approach of living life to its fullest, even when it seems like you're getting drained from life, that it's just, you're being punished in that way. And so the idea that in the path of Kriya Yoga we have these ways of approaching it that are both practical, well, I should say not just both, but they're practical, they're inspiring, and they're transformative. And that's a good combination. Because if it's not practical, we won't really find the steps, especially in the beginning, to make those things come together. And then the inspiration has to be there because it has to go beyond the drudgery of, I'm doing this. And then, as we start to feel the touch of that experience directly as our own, we know that transformation is happening. We're not just wanting it to happen. We're not even just wanting to affirm that it's happening. We're in it. And in that depth of it, we're no longer having to convince ourselves this is a good thing. I remember I had this experience a few years ago when I was 18. That
it was 2 years ago.
Something like that. That because I became a meditator when I was 18 and a vegetarian when I was 18. And my sister, who was the oldest of my siblings, she was 12 years older than me, is 12 years. Her birthday was just yesterday, actually. Luckily, I sent her a card before I came on this trip. So. But for whatever reason in her karma, in her life, what I was exploring was very threatening to her. And she never admitted that and wouldn't say that, describe it that way. But her energy, her words, her actions conveyed that pretty clearly. And to the degree that she would always verbally attack me when we had family gatherings. She would just, come up with cute derogatory names for me, or just challenge me about what I was doing and how foolish I was. And at first I got into jostling with her, I want to respond, and then I realized what was the point of that. But I remember this one very poignant experience is that, and it was just a few months before I moved to Ananda Village in California, that I think it was an Easter family gathering at my parents' home. And for whatever reason, in that setting, my sister chose it as a real opportunity to lay into me verbally. I mean, it was just, why not? This is a perfect setup. I get to do it in an audience, And for whatever reason, the hook got me. And it wasn't that I was reactive in an outward way. I just was really hit by it inwardly. And so I was in tears. And so I had to excuse myself, and I said to my mother, I'm just going to go home. this isn't working for me. And I continued to have tears in the drive home. When I got home, it was a difficult situation because what my sister had challenged was me being on this path with Yogananda. And so this is an interesting irony, maybe it was my karma, my situation, that when I got home I went to my meditation room and sat there. But the odd part was I felt, because the challenge was my relationship with my guru, I thought, oddly, that I just have to pray to God, because if the challenge was the guru, I need to see if this was true. And so I prayed, if this isn't a true path for me, then I need to know. I prayed with tears in my eyes to God. And, prayed that if Master Yogananda was my guru, let me feel that. And it was kind of a vacuum for a little bit. There was no sense of anything happening. And then suddenly and this is the way I described it, and I can even just describing it now, I can tune into it. What happened was that I felt a little light. So it wasn't like I saw the little light, which I probably obviously saw, but I felt it. I felt that light. And I just thought, let me be there with this experience. And it just unfolded to make me feel more of that light and light. And then I knew at that point that this is my spiritual journey, this is my spiritual path, and I was committed to it. And from that point on, I never felt I had to defend my spiritual path, even to my sister or anybody. I just felt like, no, I know this now. This is the transformative experience that was real to me. It wasn't something I was affirming. It was real to me. And not in some, dramatic way or some overpowering way. It was the nature of myself coming to realize this was who I was. Nice way to have that experience. My sister continued to be really good at doing what she does with me. But she had this really horrific thing happen where her husband, who was a Lutheran priest and that pastor, which is part of probably why she was attacking me, and her daughter, who was I think 7 at the time, they were killed in a head-on collision with a drunk driver driving on the wrong side of a freeway. And so it was horrendous, obviously. And she had a son as well. But when I went up there to give support, I think something started to shift, And what I started to do at that point was that, and I continue to do this at this point in my life too, every day I include my sister in my healing prayers, every day. And so a number of years ago, 6 years ago, my nephew, my sister's son, came to Ananda Village. He was the first one in my family that actually ever did that. And actually, my brother did later, and he and his girlfriend came, and we were showing them, Parvati and I were showing them around. And then we had lunch together in the Expanding Light Retreat dining room. And at one point he turned to me and he said, "So, you and my sister are very different." And what is it that's different from how you see it? And because even he basically at one point said that his mother was neurotic. He used that word. She was fearful of death, fearful of facing something like dementia or Alzheimer's. She brought it up frequently to him. And I said to him what I just told you. I said, I pray for your mother every day with a very sincere prayer. Not that I'm praying for her to change. That's not my intention or focus. It's simply to wrap her up in that presence of the divine. And if she's receptive to it, then that will be there for her. And he just looked at me and said, I understand. And actually then, he lives in the Silicon Valley area. He works for a startup company in the Silicon Valley. And so when Parvati and I did the Sunday service for Ananda Palo Alto, which is right there in Silicon Valley, he came with his daughter and his girlfriend. And it was interesting because usually they would have Sunday school, because it's a big congregation, Ananda Palo Alto. And for whatever reason, they didn't have Sunday school. And the daughter at that point, I think, was about 6 or so years old. And so the only possibility was for her to sit in on Sunday service, or for them to not be there at all. And so she sat through it. And I asked her afterwards, so what did you think? And she said, it was okay. Kind of like, I survived, it's okay. But just these touches that we have. And so when you think about what we're given in the path of Kriya Yoga, one of the primary first things we deal with is energy. Where's our energy? How are we dealing with that? And so Yogananda developed the energization exercise as a way to really become more real in that, rather than just hope I have more energy. That if I do drink more coffee, I'll have more energy. I was just reading something about a journalist, one of the TV journalists that was covering the election, and then she had her slot. So she was up most of the night, and then she had her slot at 5:30 or 6 o'clock, and she said, first thing she said, well, I've got this line of coffee cups. But that's, of course, a very artificial way of dealing with energy, because it spikes and it drops. But what we're tuning into, what Yogananda emphasizes, is that if we can somehow, again, align ourselves by focusing on energy, not so much in the just, I want more energy, but becoming more energy. And the energization exercises are about that as we refine them. That sure, we feel recharged, and Yogananda referred to them as the rechargers, but that's kind of like the opening step into a room. But then you have the whole room to explore. And that's really what's there with energy, is that we get to explore how we feel we are that energy, not just that we have more energy. And Yogananda's phrase, which is one that I've tuned into it in different refined ways, he said, the greater the will, the greater the flow of energy. But he didn't say the greater the will, the greater the energy. Interesting, eh? He said it was the greater the will, the greater the flow of energy. Now you have more energy, but he's emphasizing, again, that alignment, that attunement into the flow that happens. Because if you open up the flow, the energy is the result. The energy isn't so much the focus in this, is that we're opening up, uncovering the potential of that experience. But that's different. It's a little bit more refined. And as we do the energization exercises, those that know them, then that's what we're tuning into. We're tuning into the flow. And it results in what we have as tension with the will, and then we relax and feel. And that balance is tremendous. This idea that we can bring energy into things, and we can relax and be in the feeling of that experience. Well, that's a tremendous gift. I mean, not only for boogie boarding, but really for every experience we have in life, whether it's a physical part of our life, or an emotional part of our lives, a mental part of our lives, a spiritual part, that becomes a woven part of how we not only have the inspiration, but as I said, we have a true experience of transformation. Because we are that energy. And energy is one of the aspects of the divine that we know about, that it's not just, I'm doing these exercises to get somewhere, I'm doing these so I can meditate better. I mean, that's part of what happens, but it's a shame if that's your focus. Because we want to, as Ram Dass wrote in his book, be here now. In the energization exercise, we want to be here now in that experience of the divine. Not doing it so we get the experience of the divine, but being in the experience of the divine. And that's that refinement that comes naturally if we always keep opening and offering ourselves in that experience. But remember, Yogananda had this other phrase, be even-minded and cheerful at all times. I was saying this in Michigan, that I remembered when I was standing there saying this same phrase, that when Parvati and I started Ananda in Seattle back in 1986, we moved there 2 weeks after we got married. So that was interesting. The Seattle group gave us a bed as their wedding gift to us, so that worked out pretty good. But one of the classes that we did at the beginning, because we didn't have a facility, we were just renting, a place to do classes. And I forget what the topic was, but I said this phrase, to be even-minded and cheerful at all times. And this guy raised his hand and said, "That seems pretty wimpy." I mean, you can imagine that. Here it is, I'm trying to move forward, and one of you says, "That sounds pretty wimpy," And I understood where he was coming from saying that. I mean, you can interpret that if you're coming from the outside looking in, because that's how the world would see that. Wait a minute. Now, one of the heroes in professional football in this town we're in right now is Troy Aikman. He was the quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys when they won the Super Bowl 3 times. But he's a journalist. He is one of the commentators for professional football now. And he made this interesting comment. I just happened to glance it in a news feed not that long ago, maybe a couple of months ago, that because he just went through a second divorce recently, and someone urged him to, approach this phase of life with contentment for whatever was happening. And he said, that was like a bad word. I just, I'm not going to accept contentment as my modus operandi. Because he didn't understand it from the inside. He saw it again as, that's a wimpy thing to be. That's a passive thing to be. But true contentment is said to be the prince of virtues in the Yoga Sutras. So it's not something that's passive. It's engaged, it's activated, it's magnetic in what it does. And that's what that phrase, being even-minded and cheerful, refers to. That it's a powerhouse of focus, relaxed, concentrated awareness in life. But it's coming from that the ups and downs don't have to affect us. They're going to be in our lives. That's a guarantee, the ups and downs. The challenges are going to be there whether you meditate or not. I can tell you, that traffic on 635 right now is not going to change because you're meditating. It just is the reality. And so the point isn't to do something about the traffic. I mean, the traffic engineers will do their best to help us, but they don't seem to be doing that great. But our role is to say, whatever is happening around me, to me, through me even, where am I? Where's my choice in that? And if we're choosing to be even-minded and cheerful, then it becomes, wow, this is a great play that's going on. This is entertaining. Let's see what I can do. And so, talking about Shakti's here, and Eric was with us last night. But I was mentioning my wife Parvati just has a book out, which will be on sale. I'm not selling it, but it'll be on sale this weekend. Maitri promised that. But what was I saying?
Something about your wife.
I know, yeah. But
your wife.
Yeah.
Shakti and Eric.
Yeah, it was Eric. That's what the point was. Thank you, Shakti. But Eric said by the end of last night's program we did, he had already ordered the audio version of it that Parvati recorded. Yeah, and because he said he drives a lot, and so the audio is a better relationship for him to tune into something that way. And I thought, that's what we want to do, because the audio also has a vibration. Although I love reading books, a number of us really just love having a book or a Kindle, but I like the physical book myself. But the audio becomes a vibrational connection as well. I mean, several people who have gotten the audio version of Parvati's book have said, I love it. She's giggling at points. I mean, it's a vibration of her soul expression. And so if we can be that always, whether we do it in this way or that way, but just we are who we are in terms of always that opening to the deepest, and yet also the lightness of that. Not the heaviness of, okay, I'm a devotee, and but the sense, I'm a devotee. Let me shine with these qualities. Let me just be a lighthouse that shines us out in that way. And so with energy, we can feel the practical application of this. But then as we move into the other parts of the path of Kriya Yoga, we have Hong Sa. I think most of you probably practice it, maybe not all of you. But Hong Sa is this precious way of feeling that you're moving through duality into oneness. In a sense, Hong Sa is the mantra of duality. Interesting way to understand it. Because what's happening with the breath? We're watching the breath. And the breath, as it comes in, is actually affirming your separateness from life. Because it's your breath. As you exhale, you're allowing your union to happen through life. But you need the energy of that openness of the affirmation, expanding yourself, and then the release down. Because the subtlety of the technique is the movement of the forefinger of the right hand. That we move it. Now some people really move the finger, which I don't think is the point. You see if you can watch my finger move. That's how much I move it. But I can feel it moving because we're identifying with I. It means, Hong Sa means I am spirit, or I am he. And so when you're inhaling, you're identifying with I. And then, as you exhale, you're focusing on being in that attunement with, I'm spirit. And so that allows us to go then into between the breaths, into the pauses. Because that's where the experience of meditation allows us to be completely enveloped in the experience. Rather than having the experience, we become experience. We become the experience that's happening. And so that enlivens us in a way that moves in ways throughout our daily activities, because it's like that's what's happening in life. We're really in Hong Sa throughout the day. We're in that flow always. And then the Om technique allows us to be just immersed in the experience of who we are. Supriya and I were talking about this, that often we get into interesting habits when we're in groups. Groups tend to do that. There's a peer pressure, am I doing this right? If I'm new, I better follow what everyone else does. And there's a real positive part of that. But I was mentioning that at Ananda Village at the end of purification. So if you come on Sunday, this isn't a sales pitch, but if you come on Sunday, that we'll do the purification ceremony. It's an invitation to each of you individually come up and feel a blessing. But at the end of that, normally at Ananda Village, in the Temple of Light, we chant Om to end it and go on to the next part. But a lot of people raise their hands because that's the norm for a lot of people to feel what's happening when you chant Om. But in that case, at the end of purification, it's like the word Amen is often referred to as the phrase, and so it is. And so let it be, something like that. And that's what we're doing at the end of purification. We're in that attunement of the aura of Om in the experience of being purified. So it's not a directing of that Om to others. We do that at the end of the other ceremony at Sunday service, the Festival of Light. We very intently, very focused, really radiate and broadcast that vibration of Om into healing the globe around us. And so these refinements start to help us just become more aware and associated with a deeper, truer sense of who we are. Not adding to who we are, but allowing ourselves to come to that truer, deeper sense of who we are. Isn't that interesting? It's a nice way to look at not only the approach we take to our practices, but the approach we take to life. And then Kriya, the technique of Kriya Yoga, really allows us to be in the center of who we are more deeply. And we're experiencing it not only as energy in its outward form, but in that subtle form of prana, the life force, at the heart of who we are inside. And allows us to quicken that unfoldment, that uncovering of who we are in that way. And so the path of Kriya Yoga is really the journey, whether we know it to be the path of Kriya Yoga formally or not, is really how the soul is finding its way back to God. And as the soul explores that and then moves with that, that's when life's challenges shift from being problematic into being another way of speeding up the unfoldment. And that's priceless to get to know that more and more. Because it isn't a belief structure, although if you come to Sunday service, I think the topic is prayer and faith, something like that. Belief and faith, something like that. Yeah, something like that. Prayer is a call to faith, faith is a call to prayer. Yeah, so, but just in terms of what we're exploring this evening, is that we're allowing ourselves, again, to shift from being on the outside, looking in, to the inside, always being an open channel for allowing this to spread out into the world. So more than just for ourselves personally, although that's very significant that we're doing that for ourselves, we also have this sense of opening it up to just let it spread out into the world, to touch other people, as they want to be receptive to it. It's up. We're never going to proselytize or impose a dogma. We're always going to do it from the sense of invitation, of opening up, because that's important. Because it's not that we're lacking clarity. We're just allowing the clarity to find its way expressed in the world. Because then we can change, not so much we can change, but we're facilitating a flow of experience, of consciousness, of energy, of the touch of grace, so that even a stone can be transformed. I mean, we may not turn stone into bread. Most of us don't want that much carbohydrate in our lives. And that's not the point. The point is that we're opening so that life itself is more connected to us, and we're more connected to life. And it's coming from this stream of expanded consciousness. And maybe at times we feel like we've got a sliver, or maybe we feel we don't have anything of that expanded consciousness. And that's just the play of Maya, of duality, that we ever feel, I don't know about this expanded consciousness stuff. And so that's where it comes into play with this emphasis of the expectation of something needing to happen is not where we want to place our emphasis. Because we can be easily disappointed. But rather than expectation, how about this? How about if we approach it always that we're open to the possibilities? It's a nuance, isn't it? I mean, it's really saying close to the same thing, but the reference is different. One is just saying my emphasis on being open to the possibilities, not that this should happen. Because you never know what your karma is that's filtering, experiences in your life. In the book, The Essence of Self-Realization, there's a quote from Yogananda that talks about that there's a term from the Bhagavad Gita called Nishkam Karma. And basically, Yogananda, in The Essence of Self-Realization, this quote, is applying it to meditation, which is very interesting. Because normally it just applies to our outward activity. But in it, he's saying that meditate without the attachment or expectations of the fruits of your meditation. Now, in the beginning, when we learn meditation, believe me, we have pretty strong expectations that I'm going to find peace or whatever quality. And that's good, because it generates a momentum of the intention into action. But then we have to realize, yeah, it had its purpose jumping off the diving board. But then we need to refine what happens at that point. You need to get into diving position and focus on welcoming the water as you enter into it. And so, likewise, we're able to explore dynamically the possibilities, but it's more, like I said, the phrase that Yogananda used for the energization exercise, the greater the will, the greater the flow of energy. If we can orient ourselves into the flow of energy, we're still very focused and directed, but success isn't happening in a particular way. The success is happening because we're offering ourselves ever more in a deep, refined way in the experience that is happening. Be here now. And so, the last time we were in Hawaii, in Maui, we had, when we were doing programs at Ananda Los Angeles some months before, so this was 6 years ago in 2018, that someone that was attending the Los Angeles Ananda programs my wife and I were giving was mentioning that she has a friend that lives in Maui that's one of the caretakers for Ram Dass, who wrote the book Be Here Now. And this woman said, you should try to connect with my friend there and see if you can visit Ram Dass. And so we found out about it and got directions and went there. And he was in a wheelchair at that time, very confined. And there was a group of devotees, and they were chanting, because Ram Dass means, you know what the word Ram Dass means spiritually? Das means servant. Ram is the Lord. So Ram Dass in the form was a servant of the Lord Ram. And so they were chanting all these versions of chants to Lord Rama. And so we introduced ourselves, and I had brought the Finding Happiness book, which is a quote for each day of the year as a gift, and a nice note for him. And he was just very, very receptive and open. And actually, he took Parvati's hand and kissed it. But it was just, you could feel his vibration in that way, that he was in that flow. And then he passed away about 6 weeks later.
Wow.
Yeah, it was very sweet. And but that idea that he was a good example of being in that flow. He had a stroke some years later or earlier, and he had written a book about that, or made a film, or someone made a film on him, on that stroke, right? That was what it was, yeah. But just in our own lives, whether it's that dramatic, an obvious thing that happens, or it's just the simple living of our lives inside with God, and then being, in whatever way we can, being that open instrument, being that open channel. Whether it's praying for others, like my prayer for those decades for my sister. So to end the story about my sister, of my siblings, because my other siblings, my two brothers, got into spiritual things, more yoga-oriented things. Never really gelled for them, but they were aware of it. But now, when I have conversations with them individually, the more open conversation was my sister. So you never know. And again, I didn't have the expectation I'm going to, have my sister be transformed by my prayers. I just thought, no, I'm just offering this. It's like the rain's going to come down. Great. She gets to get washed in the rain of my prayers. And it was there. There was the experience for her that she was much more open. She's still really good at being opinionated, but she was allowing something else to come into her life. And that's what can happen for us as instruments, that we can live our lives to the fullest by really looking at these things. And also I want to just mention of listening. Listening not so much with the physical auditory capabilities, because some of us have hearing aids at this point, and Yeah, a friend of ours, Indra Devi, who's I've known for, almost 35, 37 years. She just got hearing aids just the other day. And I don't think she had realized she had any hearing difficulty until she went to someone. Because she works in our compassionate care ministry of working with aging people. And so I think she was picking up on, and she said, it's amazing. I can actually hear things. And I thought, so the listening I'm referring to is more of the heart-soul listening. That, oh, that's what's happening here. This is my opening here. This is the possibility in my heart and my soul. And if we can just be in that experience, we don't have to worry so much about, oh, this needs to happen for this to happen. It's more that, well, let me use discernment, discernment, but also just be exploring what is the adventure that's trying to happen. So, anyways, I want to share those things with you and give you a chance to ask questions if you had any or thoughts that you want to add in.
So back when I first started meeting people from India and hearing about like the word karma and just very peripheral stuff, I remember there was like the story about, or the concept that if a child was drowning in a pond and one guy, Indian guy, said, well, that's their karma. I got really mad. I was like, well, you're not going to help them? No, it's their karma. And then I took it to someone from Ananda, probably Lauren, and he goes, well, of course you're going to extend a stick, throw something, do everything you can to save them. If they still die, that's their karma, right? So that the whole idea about just being content, oh, look, there's the child drowning. I mean, sometimes...
But that's not content. That's not contentment.
Yeah.
No, and that's where people get confused.
Yeah.
They're associating things, but they're still coming from their conscious mind. And I think that's the challenge we're always facing. We take some very deep concepts like contentment, and we're not experienced in that. And so we're still associating with a certain understanding that's limited. And that's a good example, is that you also want to use the other tools that we're given, not only contentment, but compassion, care. But, I mean, remember, everything we're involved in involves karma. And so it's not as if karma has a fate that's going to happen. And that people confuse that. They think, well, that's their fate to drown. But that isn't true. Karma is more a sense of a flow. So that child may have the karma of either drowning and losing their lives, or almost drowning and losing their lives. But it's more the flow of that karma, and it can be mitigated. And so our part is to discern that if someone is in need, let me at least do the best I can from my understanding of things to help them. That's really how karma works. So we're not necessarily going to save that child, but we're going to let our energy flow in that direction of that possibility. And that's the real understanding of karma. And so I remember when we lived in Portland, Parvati and I were the spiritual directors of Ananda Portland in Oregon, that every year I got to do this class for Portland State University. It was on world religions, and they wanted me to come and do a talk on basically Hinduism, which I said, I don't really relate to Hinduism, but more the teachings of yoga. Oh, you'll be fine. One time when I went, they were finishing off watching a slideshow and had to do with karma. And it was saying these things that are kind of the dogma of karma, that you might be born as a centipede next lifetime because of your choices to do it. And so afterwards they were asking me I said, I don't really tune into karma working that way. Is that we're always trying to move forward expansively with our choices. And if you just bring it out to that common point, then that's how we relate to karma. So you can do the worst possible thing, but still your karma is going to maybe, cause you to do something, but it's rare you're going to be born as a centipede. You may be a butterfly, but it's rare to be so caught in that formula, rather than, hey, the Bhagavad Gita says that in your last breath in this lifetime, before you leave your body, you can alter your karma by the consciousness in that thought. So that potential, if it's at that point, why can't it be at any point preceding that? And so, but this is the difference between philosophy or theology, is that there can be a tendency, and it's normal because of the world of Maya, is to box things in. And because there's a security in having a box with subtle things. But, it's like Swami Vivekananda, who was the great sage that was the foremost disciple of the great master Ramakrishna, had this wonderful phrase that Swami Kriyananda would quote, and people misquote it, but he said, "It's a blessing to be born into religion, unfortunate to die in one." Now some people have exaggerated that and said it's a blessing to be born in religion, it's a curse to die in one. But if you think of the word curse, that's an intense description. And that would never be the case, that would be a curse. It's just unfortunate because you have a possibility of expanding beyond the form of it. So you appreciate the form, it gives us a sense of stability in the beginning, especially of a spiritual path. But then we want to identify with what's behind that expression. And so dogma isn't really the critical problem. It's when we become dogmatic about dogma that it becomes really a challenge. Because we're buying into a definition rather than the experience and moving through that. But that's an interesting way to look at it. And it's not an airy-fairy kind of optimistic view spiritually. It's very practical because it's real. It's very real when you're dealing with people and the challenges that happen to them, to you, and the world around you. If you can be effective in shifting the focus from set points and then use those set points as a possibility to be in the flow that's going to be effectively helping yourself and other people. And that's possible. It doesn't take a lot. It takes us dedicating our lives into that flow, though, but not with the sense of we're dogmatic about it. Interesting, isn't it? Yes?
So if you were to wake up one day or wake up tomorrow and all of your karma is just washed clean, and there's you have no cause, it's just gone. But then your karma, you could pretty much see it in real time. You put out some light and you put out some good, you do something kind, and immediately it's reciprocated, or could it?
Well, let's just put it this way: you don't have to wait to have all your karma washed out to have that experience you're describing. Yeah. You can do it right now with however much karma you have, and that's really the choice. That's why introspection, Yogananda and Lahiri Mahashaya emphasize that introspection allows us to step back from the immediacy of karma or whatever's happening and see for what it is. This is what's happening. You're wearing a white shirt, I'm wearing a blue shirt. You're just able to see that, without saying, oh, I really like the white shirt or I really don't like the blue shirt. You're just seeing it. And that introspective possibility, as you become more aware of that, you can see exactly what you're describing, what your choice, and you get to see it sooner than later. If you've made a choice to be upset at someone, you start to feel it, not so much even in your mind, but in the sense of your experience. It feels uneasy, unsettled in that way. So
going back to the boy in the pond, so his karma, he tripped, or he was being silly, and he tried to be too courageous, and he tried to jump for something that caused him to fall in the pond. So that would be his karma, that consequence, right? Cause and effect. But then you as the observer, because I think I heard it in Hermetic teachings, it's there's two things that are that's the real bad stuff, is you can't infringe on someone else's free will. And then number 2 is that if you know truth, you must be that truth, or like spread that truth and tell it. So like I would take that in the second category, like that boy isn't drowning from his will. It was, you know, you can see the struggle. So that would fall into the second category. Tell me if this is wrong. I'm putting this together as I'm saying it. So it would fall into the second category. And that learning that of like knowing truth but not doing something with it, that's what's been getting on, like that's what's been feeling heavy on me lately after learning that. So I'd like to know your perspective.
Well, it actually can shift from being heavy to being very light, because your awareness around it allows you to make real choices that are always going to be expansive. But let's just put it into this theoretical situation. So what if the boy, by choice, by will, decided to drown? It wouldn't change anything really, because we're going to come at it from where we're at. And our compassion will still be there in that way. And even if it's not the right thing that we're doing, our compassion, our sincerity to try to do the right thing is probably what needs to happen, even if it's interfering with somebody's free will. Because in that moment, we're not going to think, now, what is this kid's karma? Yeah, you're just going to, because you'll have built up the momentum of who you are to really not have to make a choice from the mind, but more from your soul qualities. And introspection allows us to be more integrated into that. So, and again, remember, we have egos. And when we don't have our egos, we're liberated. So believe me, we have our egos. So the point isn't that we don't have egos. The point is, what are we doing with the setting we're in? Always being expansive. And that expansiveness may be a tiny increment, at least from our perspective, of moving forward. And so even if we blow it by making the wrong decision, if our sincerity and willingness to open up is there, we will self-correct. It's like I always say with the yoga asanas, yoga postures, that once you learn the basic parts of it and you're paying attention and you're conscious in the experience, you will self-correct in doing yoga posture to a more refined experience. And a teacher or a guide just helps facilitate that, but it's still you learning that. And the more we're open to that, the more we will, self-correct probably isn't the right word, but it's close enough, that we're just going to realign ourselves in a more refined way, in that way. So it's not so much we have to, am I doing the right thing or not? It's more, am I doing something that's helpful? Because always, unless we develop intuition through introspection. So it's not to worry about making the wrong decision. It's just always opening up to learning and being in the flow. And then we will correct ourselves, even if we do it drastic. Like someone at Ananda Village told me that they weren't really, really conscious in driving, and they ran into someone. And her thought was just, oh my God, I could have killed this person. And literally, when she described the condition, just a few more inches and this person would have been gone. And she just felt so bad about that. And I said, well, remember, that isn't who you are. It's just an episode in your life. And you can't just push it away or become numb to it. You just have to say, okay, I offer this up. At the end of the day, I'm going to offer this up to God, and I'm going to tune into, let me be a little bit more aware, more conscious, more focused on what I'm doing. And so, again, that's a gain in that experience that could have been, and was for her, even though she didn't injure someone, was a brutal impact on her. But, just talking it through, she felt, I can do that. And so as we train, and that's what we're doing, we're training ourselves to be responsive in this positive, not an airy-fairy, namby-pamby, everything is positive kind of thing, but more the sense of, I'm in that positive flow. Life itself can always be positive. Let me unite that experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I'm So when they say when people are driving, they get into a flow state, but it's like an unconscious flow state. And then whenever you said about the wave of going with the flow, but sometimes you get pummeled, and then like flow being, what is it said? Like it's where like anxiety and skill, it's like right on that edge. Like you're pushing yourself, but it's not too far out. So you're in like if you're, I imagine
In the zone?
yeah, and I imagine like when you go rescue somebody, and I've had
Yeah.
that you do go into like a no ego
Yeah.
state.
Well, who knows? You still may have an ego and you're still functioning as if you didn't have an ego. But the point is that, and from the understanding of yoga, you actually don't go unconscious. You become subconscious because you're there. Unconscious relates to you're not there, but you're there even in those states where you seem it's automatic, but it's subconscious. So you're on more of an automatic rote pattern, and that's something as we use the technique, especially of meditation, we're changing that relationship. We are becoming more focused and aware, and also just with the attitudes. Like, what thought do you wake up with? I mean, I'm not asking this rhetorically. What thought do you wake up with?
Thank you.
Thank you? Yeah, as long as we can really be real in that first thought of the day, then we have that momentum set in motion. We may lose it many times during the day, but the more we focus on that approach, and you bookend it at the end of the day with thank you, then you have a greater possibility of opening up to that experience. And as that experience grows in us, it's really not that it's increasing, we're decreasing the resistance that clouds that over all the time. And when we have that happening, then the divine can happen through us much more. And that's really what we're opening up to, is that divine, you could call it grace or just the flow. And then possibilities can go beyond our conscious understanding of what's possible. And so you're not so much in the zone that most people refer to that term. You're in just a more integrated whole experience. And that's what happens when you boogie board really well or ski or do anything. You're really in, and as a meditator, you feel it more as that experience that a lot of athletes have. But you're also there opening up to more than just the experience. You're becoming the experience. And that's, some people have that description of the zone. Mike?
Thank you. I enjoy this day. I enjoy every day. That's what I would.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of affirmations. There was online Ananda, you get some free stuff. Like there was a 2-hour thing on affirmations that was just a beautiful experience. Now one of the things they mentioned is that most people's thoughts are 80% negative. And I thought, well, gee, that can't be for me. And then,
And you're just at 79, so
well, seriously, because in the experience, like you say, expanding in the experience of getting ready for Home Saw, in the pranayams where you meditate after them, that's what I do anyway, then I can get past all negative emotions and all thoughts. So that's like something I do every day. And then I do Home Saw, then I do the Kriyas, the higher Kriyas every day, all that.
Yeah.
But then the thing is that I think that I'm not really creating so much karma because I'm not in my self-talk always in some negative mode or some random thought. You know, I'm trying to keep my energy focused on the divine within and relate to that and see the silver linings in every experience and actually see a whole different world. And so this is like the flow of the expansion from meditation. And it's like the third and fourth Kriyas I really recommend because I think there's something there that's really a strong connection to the divine.
Well, that's very true, but it's also true that in this moment, breathing your breath can be that experience. And I think that's where it's at, is that we need to have the whole spectrum. What Mike is describing is some of the more specific ways through meditation that we really can have that experience. But why not enjoy the adventure in every moment? And that's really what you're describing. You know, in this breath, in this thought, in this action, can we also feel that? And yeah, sometimes it feels like, but I'm here and I thought I, should be with more peace. And it's just saying, well, no, let me feel the peace I have in that way. And so I think it's always this balance for us, is that we do our part, but we also draw the divine part. And I mean, Yogananda had this formula that he expressed, which was just sweet, very light. He said of the 100% of the devotee's journey, 25% of it our part, but it's 100% that we're offering, but it's only 20% of the journey. And 25% is the grace of the guru, and 50% the grace, which means it's really 75% God and guru. But that doesn't mean we should do less than our 100%. And the trick is that we're coming from the training that is saying, I'm doing it. And what we're shifting is to God and I are cooperating to do this together. And when we're looking at building our lives in that way, then we have success right now. And all we're doing is opening up to more of that success. Or as Yogananda phrased it, we're improving our knowing of who we are, that self-realization. So good questions. Thank you.